Hey, family, it's your sister Jocelyn here, and welcome to another episode of Faith on the Journey. If this is your first time tuning in, we welcome you. We're so glad that you are here and want you to know that we are committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and discover a sense of community. And we do so through a variety of ways by connecting you with a team of Christian counselors who specialize in trauma and grief counseling. We also offer healing groups throughout the year. You can learn about these resources and so much more by visiting our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. Now, today we have a special guest joining us who is someone who I consider a brother in Christ, a brother in ministry who I've had the pleasure of working with. This gentleman has years of experience working in nonprofit. He is a licensed minister, served for 15 years as a deputy commissioner with the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services. And recently, he was appointed as executive director of a nonprofit organization called Emmaus. He also was a previous guest on our show because he serves as a co founder of a marriage ministry with his wife called the Marriage Investors. And so, Reverend Joel Mitchell, is doing amazing things for the kingdom. And we're so glad to have him on the show with us today. Welcome, Reverend Joel.
Hello, my sister.
Hey,
God
thanks for
bless
hanging
you.
with me.
Thank you so much, Reverend Jocelyn, for allowing me to come in and share with you and with your audience, just to shed light on this very important topic and oftentimes overlooked topic, as you mentioned. So, thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you. And I want to congratulate you on your new appointment as the executive director of Emmaus. That's really exciting. They chose the right one.
Lord have mercy. Well, I appreciate your congratulations, and I will even more appreciate your prayers.
You
Being
got
an
them.
executive director and having sat in this seat, you know all too well. So I solicit your prayers, my sister. I
You
solicit
you
your
could
prayers.
count on them. You in the hot seat, but you're doing good work for the kingdom. And this is really what I want people to know about today is the mission of your nonprofit, why you exist, and what's really happening with young men out there that people are unaware of. So let's first start up talking about the mission of Emmaus, a little bit more about your company story before we get into some of my other questions.
Thank you. Definitely. I think it's so important just to start with a little bit of the history. So, Emmaus is an organization that was founded in 1990 by a Christian gentleman by the name of John Green. John Green, during this time, was a student at Wheaton College. And as a part of his studies, he did a lot of outreach work up on the north side of Chicago, where they did outreach work pretty much like St. Sabina has done down through the years on the south side. But they were doing outreach to women out in areas such as Boys Town on the far north side of Chicago. And as he was out canvassing and witnessing and ministering, oftentimes they were ministering to women. And as he was out with the group that were ministering and doing outreach and canvassing in this area, he noticed that there were a group of men who were across the street. And to him, it appeared as though they were engaging in some of the same or similar activities. And so, with a very curious mindset, he reached over to one of his colleagues and said, "Hey, what about those guys over there? How come no one is talking to them?" And probably without even giving it a second thought, the person that he was with said, "Oh, those are the men. No one ever talks to the men." And if you realize this was in 1990, this was probably still at the height of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. And so, as you know, my sister, back then, AIDS was treated as probably like a common day leprosy. And so no one would even go near them. And so as a result, he saw this, and the Lord really just pricked his heart. And it was from that moment that he said we needed to do something about this. And so he developed the story or the organization Emmaus. And I know a lot of people are saying Emmaus. What in the world is Emmaus? Where did Emmaus come from? Well, Emmaus is literally, if you recall, one of the resurrection stories. After Jesus had risen, he found himself on the road to Emmaus. And as he was walking down the road to Emmaus with, I think it was the unknown prophet, and I forget the other gentleman's name, but they were walking down the road to Emmaus. And then as they walked, they then arrived at one of the gentlemen's homes. And as they sat at the table, then Jesus, as he was his custom, he took the bread and broke it and he blessed it. And then he kind of removed himself from that table. And it was at that moment that the men said, "Man, well, did not our hearts burn as we walked along the way and we spoke to the Messiah?" And so Emmaus is a ministry where we walk alongside gentlemen, boys, teenagers, young adults who have been impacted by sex trafficking, human trafficking, and just commercial sexual exploitation. And so that is the entire mission of the ministry, is to help survivors who have been impacted and then ultimately help them live a life of healing and restoration, to be healed from the trauma that was inflicted.
Wow, that's important work, Joel. And I'm glad that there's a resource available for men because, as you mentioned, men are often overlooked. And as it relates to the
Mhm.
topic that we're talking about today, human trafficking, sexual exploitation, often people automatically think of just women and not the men. And so I would like for you to share a little bit more information about how prevalent this issue is and what are some of the work that you're doing specifically around human trafficking for men.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I have to, I guess, qualify this even in saying when I was first introduced to Emmaus by a former executive director, Noah Adair, he mentioned this to me and he said, "Well, Joel, we are working with Emmaus and we work with men impacted." And I said, "Excuse me, what did you say, men?" Because as you mentioned, Jocelyn, I have been in the field of social services for nearly 30 years, as long as this organization has been around. And I had never, in all of my work, I am Chicago. I mean, I've been in Chicago, born and raised in Chicago, worked in Chicago my entire adult life, but had never heard about this being an issue. Because as you mentioned, when we think about human trafficking and sex trafficking, we oftentimes think of women. But then, secondly, we oftentimes get that image in our head of the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, and that's like the first thing that comes to mind. And so we never think of the men who have been impacted. And that's why this is so important. That's why it's so important, even for you allow us to come on and share on your platform to help raise awareness. Because the thing is, there are so many myths as it relates to men. Because as you stated, it's oftentimes considered women. But then the research that our organization have done, nearly one third of all victims of sex trafficking are men. Nearly one third. The other myth is that, well, men, if they're impacted in this lifestyle, then they must either be gay or they must be homosexuals. Nearly half, or more than half, 75% of the people impacted say that they identify as heterosexual. And so they are not oftentimes gay, they're oftentimes not sex workers, which is another myth, that these men are sex workers, that they are doing this because they want to do it to make money. And then it's just people do not believe it. And Jocelyn, as you know, we are living in this day and age of just toxic masculinity. We're living in this day of everybody's talking about the alpha male. And so what that does was, inadvertently, it gives this false sense of men having agency. And because if you're a strong male, if you're an alpha male, if you have all of this masculinity, then surely you're not going to be the victim of something such as sex trafficking. But what we want people to know is that before they became men, oftentimes This has happened to men and youth when they were just kids. The average age of boys being impacted and being brought into this lifestyle and being groomed into this lifestyle happens when they are between the ages of 9 and 12 years old. Oftentimes it happens as a result of a molestation from a family member, a friend, a coach, a minister. And so these boys are being victimized, and oftentimes they are DCFS wards of the state. They're also youth, homeless youth who are impacted. And what happens was, since they are in this vulnerable state, people then, as you know, abusers will abuse anyone. For abusers, the victim has no face. They will abuse whoever is in their sphere or in their ability to reach or access. And so that is the thing that we're trying to bring awareness to, is that no, these aren't men who are necessarily gay. These aren't men who are just doing this as a result of it being their choice. Although we do not, get into that business if someone is out there, because we don't want to penalize or criminalize anyone. We just want to shed the light on the fact that these boys and young men and young adults have been victimized. They've experienced extreme trauma, and they need a safe space. They need a resource where they can go to find healing.
Yes, they do, Joel. And I love that you all are raising that awareness. And I'm sure when they finally receive resources from your agency, the process of rediscovering self and healing and working through this trauma is very difficult. And I would love for you to spend a little bit of time talking about how you help people to heal from trauma who've experienced this and what their healing journey might look like.
Thank you. Yes. So for us, we've been very fortunate. We just moved to a brand new space. We're here in West Loop, right at the corner of Washington and Morgan. And so you talk about that healing journey. We believe in trauma informed care. And so when we moved into this space, and actually, if you go to our website, you'll see a video on how we talk about our space. We were so intentional when we moved into this space that even the space was designed and developed to be trauma informed. And so as soon as you walk through the door, you have a quiet room where someone can just relax and just, come in and feel like they're in a safe environment. We have lockers. We have a table where we share meals. We have showers where people can come and just, these young people, they ride the L, they're in shelters. And so oftentimes they haven't had a nice warm shower. They haven't washed their clothes. And so we have washers and dryers where people can wash their clothes. When you come into our space, you'll see a table, because just like Jesus in the story of Emmaus, with Zacchaeus and the unnamed prophet apostle, they sat at the table. And so being at the table for us is so vitally important, because at the table, that's the great equalizer. We are all welcome at the table. And so when you come into our space, the other thing is, you'll notice that there's a lot of sunlight. You'll notice that there's exposed brick. There's a lot of hardwood floors. All of these things are conducive to being a trauma informed space where people feel safe. And then the second thing, when we get into the process of serving, when someone first visits our location, we are not consumed with learning their story. For men, it takes on average 2 to 3 years to even be in a place to tell their story. So we're not hounding you to find out what is your story. We want you to come in and just be. That's so important. So we're not trying to do all of these applications. We're not trying to get you to sign your name and duplicate and triplicate and sign them with blood. No, we want you to just come in and feel safe. And then once you have had an opportunity to sit down, to feel safe, We want to build rapport. We want to meet the need before we try to heal, because that's what Jesus did. So often he met the physical need even prior to going into the deeper emotional or spiritual needs. And so we want to be a space where people can come and just release and feel safe. And then at that point, we have a therapist on site, we have case managers on site. We do various trauma informed groups, we do Bible studies, we provide counseling. But again, at the onset, we want people to know this is a place where you can come and just be your authentic self.
That's critical. When you describe from the aesthetics of the facility down to the people, like to create a safe environment for people to even feel comfortable to begin sharing their stories is critical. And I I know you said a couple things earlier that makes me just generate a question here around, you talked about toxic masculinity and you talked about how for men it might take 2 or 3 years for them to even share their story. And I wonder, Joel, like the difference between a woman and a man in terms of their experience around human trafficking. Do you feel like there's a different level of shame or a different experience that a man might go through simply because they went through this as a man? I feel like you were talking about this a little bit earlier, but can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, and I do believe that there is a difference, because there's so much stigma. There's so many myths out there as it relates to just what it means to be a man. I mean, we've been taught since we have been brought into this world, into this earth, that you are, even as young boys, that men don't cry, don't show any emotion, keep it all in. And so we carry that with us. And so then when we are victimized or when we are hurt, it is our natural, normal tendency just to suppress it. And so therefore we are working against, you know, two different strands here. We're working against what the individual believes in himself and how he is being viewed by the world in terms of what his manhood is. And then you're dealing with the expectations of a society that is so familiar, because they've conditioned men to not be emotional, not to share their feelings, not to tell their story. And then on the flip side, this is not, we are not raising the awareness of men to put down the experiences of women. Because at Emmaus, we want to end trafficking for all humanity. However, we know that in our community, the issues and how human trafficking has impacted women have just been at the forefront a little bit longer than men. So we're not saying we have to put down your experience to lift up this experience. We want to lift up and raise the awareness for both men and women, at the same time. But I think because it has been so prevalent with women and people have been able to share stories. I mean, just think about it. It took a long time before women could share their stories. There have been women down through the years impacted by sex trafficking, human trafficking, domestic violence. And it took a long time for people to really believe them. And sometimes it's even in our theology, and how sometimes women are treated and how men treat women. And sometimes we have a misplaced theology on that. And so here at Emmaus, we want to raise and we want to bring health and wholeness for all humanity. However, we know that it has been at more accepted initially to talk about women. So now we're just coming walking alongside, and we're lifting up and raising this issue to say, yes, we want to continue the work that we're doing with women to make sure that no one is being victimized or trafficked or abused. And in that same breath, we want to say, hey, but this also impacts boys too.
That makes perfect sense, Joel. And as it relates to the men that you've worked with, you talked about creating a safe environment. You talked about counselors, therapists being a part of their journey. But what are some other key takeaways you've discovered while working at Emmaus around the process of healing from something like human trafficking?
The before we get to the very deep and psychological and emotional and spiritual issues, I think one of the takeaways that we've learned is just understanding and being able to demonstrate empathy, because empathy is different from sympathy. Sympathy is like, oh, what can I do to make you feel better? Oh, I'm so sorry for what you've gone through. And sympathy is really more about the person expressing sympathy, trying to make it appear as though they are so concerned. Whereas empathy it's empowering, because it's like, I want to understand you. I want to understand, what you've gone through. And empathy can lead to empowerment, whereas sympathy can lead to someone feeling even more insecure because they don't feel empowered, and they're feeling pity. And so for men, I believe it is so vitally important for us to demonstrate empathy as we develop these relationships, because we demonstrate empathy, we're able to listen, we're able to hear their stories, and then we're able to empower. And when we are empowering, it lets them know that, yes, this did happen to you, but you are not what happened to you. You are still here. You're still important. And this was an issue of, let me tell you a quick story. I spoke with someone, and it was a person who wanted to learn more about Emmaus, or had been connected to Emmaus. And he said, Joel, with this work that you're doing, it's so spiritual, but then it's such a demonic space, and it's sin, and so what are you doing to help these men overcome the sin that they're faced with on a daily basis? Because the healing comes from forgiveness of sin. And I said, you know what? I appreciate you saying that. Yes, because we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory and grace of God. However, as opposed to just think, can I challenge you for a moment? So, as opposed to thinking about the men and what sin they may be committing, can I challenge you to even focus on the fact that it's not so much that these men have sinned, but that someone has sinned against them? Someone has abused them, someone has taken advantage of them, someone has exploited them. And so we need to take a step back and not be judgmental, but we need to come and walk alongside these men and empower them through empathy and through listening and through understanding, to then help them pick up the pieces and move their lives forward. And so I think that's so vitally important, that we step in into this space, not as though we already understand, not as though we have all of the answers, but we allow them to tell their stories. And then we walk alongside them to help them bring together the resources that they need so that they can live the life that God has called and created them to have.
Amen. That's good, Joel. And one of the big takeaways I pull from what you just shared is that what happened to you is not who you are. And I think that when we've experienced trauma, sometimes trauma can almost consume our identity, how we see ourselves. And
Yes.
so the process of being able to separate that, it's difficult, but have you found that partnering with individuals, not only through counseling, but do you have like mentors and just support groups? Like, how have you seen community really play a role in helping someone to see themselves in a new light, how God sees them?
Yeah, it's interesting that you would mention that, because here we are all about community. So as I stated, we do prayer groups. We also do trauma informed groups. But then we have cooking classes, and we have yoga classes. And there was a gentleman that came in, and he stated that, the Lord has been working with him, led him to counseling, and he has a therapist. But he said what happened to me when I was such a young boy, it caused me to be isolated. And when I was being isolated, I didn't have community. I didn't even have any friends. And he said, I'm so excited that Emmaus is here because now this is a place where I can come and I can find friendship. People that are not judging me, but they really like me and enjoy my company, and I enjoy their company. And so, being a community that people can come in and find, support from like minded individuals. The other thing at Emmaus that we do is that we been around, like I said, for 30 years. And so we have been fortunate that there have been a lot of people over the years that have come through our program. And now, with those older gentlemen that have come through the program and have been delivered from the life and are doing well, we have what we call an alumni program. And through the alumni program, we have some of the older people that have come through. Now they're coming back and they're sharing their stories. They are talking to the young people to let them know, and they feel it's their responsibility. So we don't even have to pull teeth to get them to come. They're like, no, we want to come so that we can tell our story, so that we can share our experiences, and so that we can help liberate them. For the word of God says we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the power of our testimony. And so these men, they come from all over, and they are so transparent and they're so authentic that to be in their presence is liberating. To be in their presence is just an honor. And so, to your point, yes, we have clinicians, we have trained professionals, but there's something about being in community, where you have people with lived experience that now they come in and they're able to share their stories to help lift up the people who may be going through something at this time.
Yeah, that's critical. And I'm glad that you shared that story because the enemy does like to keep us isolated, does like to make us feel like we have to carry our burdens alone. And
Mm-hmm.
that will keep us stuck. And in sharing our story, as painful as it can be sometimes, it's a part of the healing process.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to speak to that a little bit more because when we do finally share our sacred story, there's emotions that are going to come up. We might find ourselves crying. We might find ourselves experiencing anger, all these raw emotions. And because of society, as you were talking about earlier, we're not used to expressing, we're used to suppressing, but suppressing hurts. It causes
Mm-hmm.
further damage. And so, for someone who is at a place where they're almost ready to talk about what took place. They might not have ever shared their story before. What would you say to them, even as they realize they might have to navigate these uncomfortable emotions around it?
Yeah. Well, the thing is we must realize, and we must even sometimes let them know that when you share your story, you may experience some triggers. You may experience the hurt. You may experience the pain. You may experience the temptation to cover yourself, to protect yourself, because our minds have a great memory of when we've been hurt in the past, and so our minds don't want to don't want us to allow us to feel that pain again. And so we have to let them know that yes, you may feel something when you share this because we all experience triggers, and those triggers can be so powerful that it can take you all the way back to when the abuse may have first occurred or what that situation was. And so, again, there's this, you know, empathy approach. But then, as clinicians, there must be this kind of therapeutic approach where we are experiencing and we're utilizing all of the resources of what it means to be trauma informed to create this safety net. The one thing that we as service providers have to we have to reject this kind of temptation to want to hear their story, and then we also, because a lot of times the first thing when someone comes in, well, what happened, tell me your story. So we have to reject and resist that temptation that we're trying to just get them to tell it to us. The second thing as service providers, we must also recognize the fact that sometimes the people that we serve, they've had to tell their story multiple times in order to receive a service. And so sometimes, as service providers, we have to understand that we are not now positioning ourselves as the abuser. And so just hear me real quick, because the abuser sets the stage and presents this conditionary type of transaction, like you must tell me your story in order for you to receive services. Well, that's what they grew up on. You know, someone saying, well, you must allow me to do this to you if you want to stay in my home, or you must relinquish your food certificates and your social security card if you want to stay in this country. So things have already been in this kind of conditional transactional setting. And so we have to resist the notion that we're also setting them up to feel that way. I think that's first and foremost. And then again, it's so much, I can't overstate it. It may seem simple, but we have to create the environment where they feel patient and they feel the safety to begin to share. And they're sharing not because I have to share this in order to receive something, but I'm sharing this in order to tell my story so that I can begin to heal.
Wow, I've never heard it like that before, but it makes perfect sense because we can, in our desire to help others as service providers, actually do more harm if we force them to share their story before they're ready. And
Mhm.
so I'll keep that in mind in the future. And I think we all can learn from that, Reverend Joel. So tell us how we can support the great work of Emmaus and in the mission that you all are putting forward.
Thank you so much. You know, when I first started working with Emmaus, when they brought me on, I was a consultant because, as you stated, I spent 15 years as a deputy commissioner with the Department of Family and Support Services, running multiple programs. And so when I came in and I sat at the table at one of our first strategic meetings, we were talking about programming, but they were talking about awareness. And I put on my program hat and I was like, what are you all doing? We're supposed to be building programs. You all are talking about I'm talking about awareness. Jocelyn, I soon realized you cannot do one without the other as it relates to working with males. This organization has been around 30 years and it has literally existed under the radar. I'm talking to you today. You had not heard about Emmaus or the impact that sex trafficking has on boys and young men. That is my experience almost 90% of the time when I tell people what I do in the organization that I work with. And so, what we can do, brothers and sisters, is to, first of all, tune in to Faith on the Journey, because our sister has allowed us an opportunity to share this great work. And then I would encourage you to learn more. I encourage you to reach out to our website, which is on your screen. You can find us at Emmaus at streets.org. You will learn more about our organization, the work that we do. You'll see some of the research and the statistics as it relates to boys and young men impacted by sex trafficking, and you can support our organization. Again, we are here on in West Loop, and we are accessible from anywhere in the city of Chicago. We are sandwiched in between the blue line and the green line. We have bus routes. We're accessible, and so we implore you to learn more about our organization. And if you found someone, or if you come in contact with someone that may be experiencing sex trafficking and human trafficking, please have them reach out, give us a call. We would love to step in and walk alongside anyone who may be impacted by this horrendous experience.
Thank you, Reverend Joel. Thank you for giving up your time today. We know you have such important work to do at your agency, but I'm grateful to raise awareness around this issue. I encourage everyone to check out their website, support the work that they're doing, pray for these men, pray for the women who are experiencing this, the
Amen.
children. This is more prevalent than you realize. And so let's continue to raise awareness and help those who've experienced this to heal.
Amen. Thank you so much, my sister. God bless you. I truly appreciate you and the work that you're doing at Faith on the Journey. I know I'm not the only one with a million hats, and so I appreciate you carving out some time to allow us to come on and share the work that we do. So God bless you, and we will be praying with and for you as you continue the great work that you're doing at Faith on the Journey.
Thank you, Reverend Joel. God bless you. And thank you all for tuning in to today's broadcast. I hope you learned something new and realize how important this issue is and can find a way to get involved and support. And if you were blessed by today's episode, do me a favor and subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. Let's get this message out here to the world. And also, if you are looking for a Christian counselor or other resources to help those you love heal from trauma, be sure to visit our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. So that's it for this week, you all. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, you keep your faith on the journey.